Chapter 5. On the case. Before long, Johnson was back up and putting together information from Sachs with diplomatic intelligence. Old reports took on new meaning. One NSA intercept of a cable from the South Vietnamese embassy in Washington, D.C. stood out.
I explained discreetly to our partisan friends our firm attitude.
Ambassador Diem reported to President Thieu.
The longer the situation continues, the more we are favored, for the elections will take place in a week, and President Johnson would probably have difficulties in forcing our hand. I am still in contact with the Nixon entourage, which continues to be the favorite despite the uncertainty provoked by the news of an imminent bombing halt.
Name excised.
Informed that if Nixon should be elected, he would first send an unofficial person and would himself consider later going to Saigon before the inauguration.
The Nixon entourage to which Ambassador Diem referred included Madame Anna Chennault. LBJ wanted to know if Cyrus Vance could tell him anything about John Mitchell, Nixon's campaign chairman, and asked Secretary of State Dean Rusk to find out.
He said he just knew who he was.
Secretary Rusk reported.
He said he wouldn't put it past him at all to do something like this, but he didn't have any real knowledge of him.
Rusk wanted to delay the bombing halt a day to give them a chance to keep the deal from falling apart.
I feel myself that this thing could blow up into the biggest mess we've ever had if we're not careful here,
Rusk said. If it got out that they stopped the bombing against the wishes of their allies,
this would confirm in everybody's view that the only reason we insisted on going ahead under these circumstances was because of domestic politics. I mean, I think that would confirm that fairly well, and we can't use the information we have because of its classification to rebut any of that.
National Security Advisor Walt Rostow argued that it would be dangerous to reveal the information the White House had, since
the materials are so explosive that they could gravely damage the country whether Mr. Nixon is elected or not. If they get out in their present form, they could be the subject of one of the most acrimonious debates we have ever witnessed.
Rostow made a crucial point.
There is no hard evidence that Mr. Nixon himself is involved. Exactly what the Republicans have been saying to BDM is not wholly clear, as opposed to the conclusions that BDM is drawing from what they have said.
Johnson didn't know if Nixon was involved, but he aimed to find out. The Logan Act of 1799 prohibits as treasonous activity any interference by American citizens with the negotiations of the U.S. government. Nixon, Mitchell, and Chennault were all American citizens. With the election exactly 1 week away, the president directed the FBI to 1. Place a wiretap on the South Vietnamese embassy. 2. Report on everyone who entered or left the embassy. 3. Tail Anna Chennault and report on her movements. And 4. Tap the phone in Chennault's Watergate penthouse apartment. The FBI immediately did the first 3. LBJ routinely met with his foreign policy advisors on Tuesdays at lunchtime to discuss Vietnam, so they all gathered at 1 p.m. for what was by then their third meeting of the day.
The South Vietnamese may really see the bombing halt as a political deal to help Humphrey. They know the vice president would be softer. The Republicans have been working on them, saying Nixon would give them a better deal, but Nixon will double-cross them after November 5th.
General Abrams was angry at Thieu. He'd been in the room with Ambassador Bunker when the South Vietnamese president made the decision to support LBJ's bombing halt position.
It was unequivocal. He took it, understood it, marched right up to the plate, and swung.
The first FBI report on the South Vietnamese embassy phone was intriguing. At 7:30 a.m. on Wednesday, October 30th, a woman who did not identify herself called Ambassador Diem, who recognized her voice. He told her,
Something is cooking. Can you stop by this afternoon?
She agreed to meet after a luncheon for Judy Agnew, the wife of the Republican vice presidential nominee, Spiro Agnew. That afternoon, FBI agents observed Madame Chennault visit the South Vietnamese embassy in Washington for approximately 30 minutes. That same day, LBJ instructed Ambassador Bunker to deliver a message to Saigon.
If President Thieu keeps us from moving at this moment of opportunity, God help South Vietnam, because no president could maintain the support of the American people.
Johnson said he'd consulted with Thieu every step of the way during the bombing halt negotiations.
If President Thieu makes himself responsible for preventing the very peace talks which have cost so much to obtain, the people of this country would never forget the man responsible. No American leader could rescue the position of such a person with the American people.
LBJ was going forward with the bombing halt. He would make sure journalists knew about the 2 military concessions he had wrung from Hanoi too. While he couldn't announce them publicly, his aides would brief the press on background or just leak the conditions, so word would get into the newspapers and on television. The White House arranged a second conference call with the 3 presidential candidates. This time Johnson had something to tell them. He would also drop a pointed comment on them about partisan interference with his peace talks. No names, nothing specific, but they'd all know something was wrong. To make sure the message got through to the Republicans, the president called Senate Minority Leader Dirksen first.
Some of Nixon's people are getting a little unbalanced and frightened, and they have started going into the South Vietnamese embassy and also sending some word to Hanoi, which has prolonged this thing a good deal,
The president said on October 31st.
Now, I have information about who you had a glass of beer with last night. You don't know it, but I do.
I don't drink beer.
But you get my point, though, don't you?
Yeah.
We have ways and means of knowing what's going on in the country. We know what T says when he talks out in Vietnam, and we know what happens here. About the time you called me last week, they started going into the South Vietnamese embassy and also sending some word to Hanoi, which has prolonged this thing a good deal.
Yeah.
The net of it, and it's despicable, and if it were made public, I think it would rock the nation. But the net of it was that if they just hold out a little bit longer, that he's a lot more sympathetic and he can they can do better business with him than they can with their present president. Now, I rather doubt Nixon has done any of this, but there's no question but what folks for him are doing it. And very frankly, we're reading some of the things that are happening.
The delay, he said, was proving fatal.
But they've got this question, this new formula put in there, namely wait on Nixon, and they're killing 400 or 500 every day waiting on Nixon. Now, these folks, I doubt, are authorized to speak for Nixon, but they're going in there, and they range all the way from very attractive women to old-line China lobbyists, and some people pretty close to him in the business world.
Yeah.
I was shocked when I looked at the reports, see? And I've got them, and so forth.
The president scattered morsels of information throughout a rather long and rambling recitation of his recent difficulties.
Now, I told Dick Nixon and George Wallace and Hubert Humphrey that we had to have prompt and productive discussions. In order to be productive, the GVN had to be present. In order to be prompt, it ought to be in a matter of weeks, not 2 or 3 years, and that they wouldn't take advantage of. They wouldn't be hitting the DMZ in the cities. Now, we told them that the moment we stop, if you start any of this, we would have to just come back to bombing the next day. And you're going to get hit with interest, and we're going to double the force. And Abrams doesn't even have to come to Washington. He can do it automatically. Now then, the facts are that, as of now, the monsoon has started up there, and bombing ain't worth a damn and not going to be for 90 days in the north. So without telling them, we might quit anyway if we had nothing in return, because we need to do it in Laos where it's drying up and where they can really increase their traffic. And we need to do it in South Vietnam where they're trying to mount an offensive on Saigon. So I called in all the Joint Chiefs, and all of them recommended that we stop and that we take this GVN presence. I called in General Momier, who's been in charge of Air Force in Vietnam. He operates from Thailand. He's down at Langley, and he explained to me that it wouldn't do any good where I'm bombing now. And if I could get anything out of it, I ought to do it, move it over to the other places. Now, we can't say we're going to move it over, because it'll look like that we're not giving them anything, and we're not sincere that we're giving up bombing the north, but we're going to spread more bombs on the south. But I decided that I had to talk to Abrams before I reached any conclusion. He had sent me a cable and said he would do it without the cities and without the DMZ if they just let the GVN be present, because, in effect, he's going to do it anyway. And he said, psychologically, the GVN being present will really wreck the Viet Cong, because it'll mean that their supporters, the Soviet and the Hanoi, have really recognized them, or they wouldn't let them come in the meeting. Well, that's what our folks think anyway. I don't know, but they think psychologically this will really do them up in the South, and Westmoreland and Abrams and Momier think they've had them whipped since September. They think they're whipped. So Abrams came in at 2:30 day before yesterday morning, and he drove 24 hours straight time, and he stayed here till 4 o'clock, and he was just as strong as horseradish and said that this ought to be done. Nah, that's where we are. We are now talking to our folks here and talking about the rules of engagement and what Abrams would do if we stopped the bombing and if they should hit Saigon, and we're trying to conclude that. Now, no decision has been reached, no order has been issued. It takes about 12 hours from the time we make a decision until we issue the order. No meeting could take place before the election. The meeting would have to take place after the election, but it's my feeling that I ought to, the first minute I can, stop the killing if I can. I've been at this 5 years, and if I'd have wanted to sell my country out, I'd have sold it out 5 months ago and gone on and run for president and got this war behind us and been overwhelmingly elected. But I'm a conscientious, earnest fellow trying to do a job, and I'm going to do it. And if I can get peace at 4 o'clock this afternoon, I'm damn sure going to get it, come hell or high water, and woe be unto the guy that says you ought to keep on killing. I really think it's a little dirty pool for Dick's people to be messing with the South Vietnamese ambassador and carrying messages around to both of them, and I don't think the people would approve of it if it were known.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, now, what do you think about it?
Well, I certainly don't quarrel with the way you've handled this matter. And of course, I recognize also that the fellows on our side get antsy-pantsy about this. They wonder what the impact would be if a ceasefire or a halt of the bombing could be proclaimed at any given hour. What its impact would be on the result next Tuesday.
Well, I don't know what it'd be.
I don't know either.
There's not going to be any ceasefire. If there's going to be anything, it would be just stopping the bombing as we've done 6 or 8 times. But the big question would be, what did they stop? If they stop the cities, and if they stop the DMZ, then there'd be a lot of hard negotiations that would last several months. It wouldn't stop the war at all, but it might stop the killing temporarily.
Johnson took a moment to complain about Nixon's "this I do not believe" attack.
I thought Dick's statement was ugly the other day, that he'd been told that I was a thief and a son of a bitch and so forth, but he knew my mother and she really wasn't a bitch. I mean, you set up a statement like that and then deny it. Well, hell, he advertised all over the country, and he planted the idea, and he knew goddamn well I'd been fair to him, and it's not very good because he knows better, and that hurt my feelings. You damn Republicans get mean when you get in politics, and I think it's cost him a lot of votes. And to me, when Nixon's saying, I want the war stopped, that I'm supporting Johnson, that I want him to get peace if he can, that I'm not going to pull the rug out of him. I don't see how in the hell it could be helped unless he goes to farting under the cover and getting his hand under somebody's dress.
He named a name.
Nixon better keep Mrs. Chennault and all this crowd just tied up for a few days.
The president said.
Well, that's it. I'll have to separate this out a little. Of course, he'll call again.
I think that everybody ought to have a statement ready and ought to say, I compliment General Abrams and General Westmoreland for bringing them to this state of military affairs where they've got to agree to it, and I've supported it all along, and I thank God in my conscience that I haven't ever pulled a rug out from under my commander-in-chief. Now, that's the way I treated Eisenhower, and that's the way you've treated me up to now. And don't you get so damned eager for 83% vote that you go cutting me out there in the last few days.
You know I wouldn't.
I know you wouldn't do it. I know you wouldn't, but Dick, I don't quite understand his people. I could have settled this thing and stopped the bombing a month ago, but I've been trying to get all of my 3 things. How's your campaign coming?
Well, it's coming along pretty fair.
Well, now, would you do this any differently than the way I've been trying to do it?
No, I wouldn't.
Thank you. Goodbye, Everett.
By 6:05 p.m. that day, the White House operator found Nixon at his New York apartment, Humphrey in Newark, New Jersey, and Wallace at Norfolk, Virginia's Golden Triangle Motor Hotel. On speakerphone in the Oval Office with Secretaries Clifford and Rusk, General Wheeler, CIA Director Richard Helms, National Security Advisor Rostow, and a stenotypist taking it all down, the president gave the candidates his version of the bombing halt negotiations. LBJ emphasized the fixed, steadfast, and unyielding nature of his 3 demands. His Paris negotiators had told Hanoi at least a dozen times that he could stop the bombing only as long as it 1. Respected the DMZ, 2. Accepted Saigon at the peace talks, and 3. refrained from attacks on civilians in South Vietnamese cities. He'd gone to the Soviets to feel out the DRV response.
Now I, Lyndon Johnson, have grave doubts that the North Vietnamese would stop shelling the cities or would stop abusing the DMZ. The Soviet Union came back to me on Tuesday or Wednesday and said the doubts the president has are unjustified. Now, since that time with our campaign on, we have had some minor problems develop. First, there have been some speeches that we ought to withdraw troops or that we'd stop the bombing without obtaining anything in return, or some of our folks are, even including some of the old China lobbyists. They are going around and implying to some of the embassies and some of the others that they might get a better deal out of somebody that was not involved in this. Now, that's made it difficult, and it's held up things a little bit.
The vague reference to the China lobby was the closest LBJ came to mentioning Chennault, just enough to strike the fear of God, Lyndon Johnson, and the U.S. intelligence community into a guilty heart.
I know that none of you candidates are aware of it or responsible for it.
The president added. In a few hours, he would announce the bombing halt and
set a date for a meeting where the government of South Vietnam will appear, but in the light of these overtures that have been surreptitiously made, the gossip that's gone on by some of the lobbies and the campaigners, I don't know just what will come out of that situation. We're in touch with it. We're on top of it. We're watching it.
Once Hanoi accepted his demands,
I can't say, no, I've got to put it off because I'm concerned with an election. I'm not concerned with an election. Y'all are concerned with an election.
Nixon was the first candidate to speak.
With regard to the talks, if they begin, and as I know, you've made it clear that they may not, but you think they may, would you stop any other military action besides the bombing?
Dick, the talks will be held. We have a firm agreement that the North Vietnamese will bring the NLF in and the South Vietnamese will be permitted to attend. We will stop the bombing only in the North where, in the confidence of the family, the American family, we practically have stopped it already anyway. We will take that same bombing that's taking place in the North today and apply it in Laos and in South Vietnam, where we need it much more than we do in the North. We told them that if they shelled the cities or abused the DMZ, we would be back bombing tomorrow morning.
But you are not going to state that publicly?
Nixon asked.
No, we can't state that publicly because they will consider it an ultimatum or a threat or reciprocity or condition.
The only thing you are going to state publicly is that the other people will be allowed to come to the conference.
That's correct.
Nixon could use Johnson's self-imposed silence on the two military conditions. For now, he promised to back up the president, as did Humphrey and Wallace. Afterward, the president briefed congressional leaders and met with his NSC. When it was over, he called the only statutory member of the council who couldn't attend, Vice President Humphrey. He gave the Democratic nominee a lot less information about the Chennault affair than he'd given the Republican Senate Minority Leader. He didn't mention Chennault's name. He didn't even use a feminine pronoun, referring to a member of the China lobby as her or she in 1968 would have narrowed the possibilities.
And in the last few days, the China lobby crowd has been in it some. And they've been telling him that Humphrey wouldn't stick with them at all, so they better put off and not let Johnson make any kind of peace because they'll do a much better job. They'll be much tougher. And their ambassador's been sending that word back, and they've got two and them upset about the speech that you'd stop the bombing, no semicolon, comma, period, you know. And we've been watching it very carefully, and I know of what I speak. I'm looking at whole cards.
I know that, Mr. President.
So I had two on board 2 weeks ago, and he signed up, and we agreed on the text of a joint announcement. And then Bundy's speech came along, and they decided that they'd have to go back to Hanoi. And they went back and considered it, and Abrams won a few more victories. So they decided to go along. And when they did, in the meantime, Nixon's folks, I don't know whether he had anything to do with it or not. Don't charge that he does. I can't prove it. But some of the people supporting him told Hanoi that they could. He had no connection with this war, wasn't involved, and that he could be more reasonable, didn't have any commitments, than somebody that had been fighting them for 5 years.
Humphrey acknowledges.
And on the other side of the tack, they told the South Vietnamese that if they don't sell out, let Johnson sell them out here at the conference table and bring them in. The NLF, that Humphrey's going to get beat and they'll have a bright future.
Johnson kept Humphrey on a tight rein. Not only did he keep Chennault's identity from his vice president, he also told Humphrey not to accuse Nixon of being involved, since LBJ lacked proof. A televised presidential address interrupted America's Halloween. As promised, Johnson did not mention the military concessions Hanoi had made in return for his ordering.
That all air, naval, and artillery bombardment of North Vietnam cease as of 8 a.m. Washington time, Friday morning.
All he could do was hint at them.
We cannot have productive talks in an atmosphere where the cities are being shelled and where the demilitarized zone is being abused.
Johnson did mention one result of the bombing halt, but it benefited the North as well as the South.
A regular session of the Paris talks is going to take place next Wednesday, November 6th, at which the representatives of the government of South Vietnam are free to participate. We are informed by the representatives of the Hanoi government that the representatives of the National Liberation Front will also be present. I emphasize that their attendance in no way involves recognition of the National Liberation Front in any form.
It was possible to come away from his speech with the false impression that all the United States got in return for a bombing halt was Hanoi's agreement to sit and talk with Saigon. The Republicans had their own television broadcast that night from Madison Square Garden. Standing before 19,000 cheering supporters, Nixon pointed at his running mate Spiro Agnew and declared,
Neither he nor I will destroy the chance of peace. We want peace.
The presidential nominee said he hoped
The bombing halt would bring some progress toward peace.
news coverage took Nixon's broadcast at face value,
Nixon hopes Johnson's step will aid the talks in Paris,
said the New York Times. President Johnson's broadcast, however, inspired skepticism. Even worse for LBJ, soldiers interviewed by NBC in Saigon voiced outright opposition.
Well, I disagree with it 100%. I believe President Johnson made a wrong decision there,
said one man in uniform. Another said he didn't think it was a good idea.
We're still fighting in the South, and we're still going to lose a lot of lives this way. I think we should go bomb,
said a third. Another soldier asked if he thought it would work, said only that he sincerely hoped so. At least there was one who took a wait-and-see stand on the announcement, if not on the president himself.
Well, I think it's a feather in President Johnson's cap if it works out. If it doesn't, it's not going to look too good for him.
Do you think he had politics in mind?
A reporter asked.
Probably. Yeah, I really think so.
The background briefings had an effect, just not the one Johnson hoped. The NBC co-anchorman Chet Huntley said LBJ
made it clear that if the bombing halt is to continue, the demilitarized zone must be restored and the shelling of South Vietnam cities stopped.
But the news closed with a commentary from NBC's other anchorman, David Brinkley, making it clear that LBJ's credibility gap remained a great canyon.
There are charges the president chose this time, 5 days before the election, for political reasons,
Brinkley said.
It is charged that if ending the bombing is a good idea now, why wasn't it a good idea 5 months ago? Well, the only answer anyone can give now is, if it stops the killing of Americans and others in Vietnam, then it's the right thing to do, even if it was done for the wrong reason.
It didn't help when the vice president stood in front of the TV cameras, and immediately after saying he hoped the bombing halt would lead to peace, expressed confidence he would win the election. Republicans attacked. House Minority Leader Gerald Ford of Michigan did it subtly.
I would not like to believe that the timing of the bombing halt has anything to do with Tuesday's election. We must rely on the president's word that the bombing halt will not result in greater American casualties.
Senator Bork Hickenlooper of Iowa did it brutally.
It's tragic that American lives are being played with this way.
Senator John Tower of Texas called the bombing halt unilateral and unconditional, although it was neither. Nixon played it cool, telling a rally in Fort Worth, Texas.
I will not discuss the war in Vietnam for the very reason that any discussion might jeopardize those peace negotiations.
The Secret Service pulled James Rowe out of a Humphrey campaign rally in Peoria to take a phone call from the president. Rowe had been a young New Deal lawyer and Johnson a Texas congressman when they'd first met. Now he was a prominent Washington attorney and Humphrey advisor.
I don't want anybody to know that I've called you if I can avoid it.
Johnson told Rowe on November 1st. There was something the president wanted Humphrey to do, but he told Rowe to present the idea as if it were his own.
You just keep the candidate from mentioning Vietnam until Tuesday night,
Johnson said. He blamed Humphrey for angering Chew.
Now, Nixon picked up that ball right quick and started going into him through your China lobby friend. This damn little old woman, Mrs. Chennault, she's been in on it.
Rose's law partner, Tommy the Corcoran, was close to Chennault professionally and personally.
You want Tommy to pull her out?
I don't know. I don't care now. I already did it.
Having been requested by the president not to let anyone know they'd spoken or to quote him, Rowe immediately went and informed Humphrey of both the phone call and the identity of the China lobbyist whose name LBJ had withheld from his vice president.